Good morning. It's Thursday, April 9th. We're reading through our Bibles in the daily Bible reading. We call it the DBR, and we are in 1 Samuel. We're starting 1 Samuel today, which is a great book, a book that transitions us from a theocracy to a monarchy. Now think about that. Archy is the word for leader, the idea at least of a leader, someone at the top. And theocracy comes from the Greek word theos, which is God, that God is in charge and God is leading this nation. That's the picture of Israel before this time, and it wasn't going very well, as you know, in reading through the 335-year history of the book of Judges, and Ruth fit into that time context. But also, we know that God had planned to get us into a monarchy, where we had a person, a human being that was going to lead as a regent, as a king. And all of that was part of God's plan, even though it was as though in 1 Samuel, we'll see this, that it's like God says to Samuel, they're not rejecting you. If they ask for a king, they're rejecting me. And that seems like a bad thing. And yet in God's plan, all the way back when Moses gave us the law, it was God's intention to bring a human king. Why? Because he was going to rule his people through the Messiah one day. And so David is set up after a false start with Saul. It was the people's choice, and it wasn't a good one. Then David was chosen in this book. We have a king and a dynasty. It's set up until the son of David, the ultimate son of David, who is the Lord, as Jesus liked to point out. David calls the Lord his Lord. I mean, he is looking up to his son, the future Messiah, which is Christ, and that was part of God's plan. So we're going to read a lot about the monarchy. It starts off in this particular book with the birth of Samuel, who becomes the prophet, who probably is the one who wrote this book, and he's giving us this picture of what happened and the events surrounding his birth. So that's our Old Testament reading, chapters 1 through 3. 1 Samuel chapters 1 through 3. And then in our New Testament reading, we're in Luke chapter 12. We're going to get through the first half of this chapter today through verse 34. Jesus is warning us of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is helpful for us to think through. The leaven of the Pharisees, there's a Pharisaical and a wrong way to go about our relationship with God that is completely wrong-headed, as he points out in this passage, but it's leaven in that it gets in there and insidiously can grow if you're not careful to weed it out. Weeds, by the way, is a good way to look at it. Things in your garden, they just keep going. If you don't attend to this, it's going to grow up and it's going to overtake your garden. In the Christian life, we need to guard against the leaven of the Pharisees. It'll get in there and corrupt our lives unless we take warning to these things. This is the passage where we see that we're not to fear, which is a good reminder in the midst of this COVID-19 scare that we're in the middle of right now, this pandemic, and also the passage about the rich fool. He's a fool. God calls him a fool because he put all of his confidence in things. And certainly as the stock market tanks and we have all these problems with our economy and issues of your finances, and I'm sure your retirement plan doesn't look like it used to last year. And here we are thinking about the realities of the uncertainty of riches, and God says you cannot put your confidence in things. Your life does not consist of the abundance of your possessions. And so we trust in the Lord, which is a good reminder for us in this passage to be rich toward God and not make it our goal just to be rich in our bank account. So great reading in the Old Testament, 1 Samuel 1 through 3, and our New Testament reading, half of Luke chapter 12. Our one another for the day, I'm going to take you to, in your thinking, Colossians chapter 3, verse 13, which says this: we are to bear with one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, you ought to forgive each other. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you too must forgive. Bearing with one another, forgiving one another. These are going to go together. Even though they're to one another's, I think they are nicely complementing in our thinking today. We bear with one another, which is a word, by the way, that doesn't sound fun. Putting up with, having a long-suffering attitude toward. Jesus said at one point, how long must I put up with you, bear with you? The idea of saying, I know that you're not perfect. There are things that you do that are hard for me. It grates against what I want, but I'm going to put up with you. That might not be the way we want to say it. The way the Bible says it, bear with you because I care, I love you, and I'm willing to forgive you. Great Greek word, aphiamai, to forget, to release, to let it go, to get it to where I say, I got things I could complain about, but I'm going to let those things go. I'm going to forgive just as, another great Greek word, kathos, just as in the same way, to the same extent, in the same manner that the Lord forgave you. What a good thing for us to do when we're having trouble forgiving someone in our lives, we're having a hard time putting up with them, to think about just the amazing ways that God has looked at our sin that is far worse toward Him than any sin anyone could ever commit against you, and to realize that God forgave it. How does He forgive? As far as the east is from the west, buries it in the deepest sea, remembers your sins no more. So important for us to think about that as the gold standard of our forgiving one another. That helps us bear with one another, even when it may be hard, and there may be things in your relationships that are hard to put up with. So here's our one another for the day. 2 parts of it: bear with, forgiving. That's the picture. That's the calling. I want you to think about it really carefully as you think about the people in your life right now that may be tough, you may be struggling with. Bear with them and forgive them just as the Lord forgave you.